Welcome back to The Heath. Those incredible photographs were taken by documentary photographer Stephen Sommerstein. He's among our distinguished panel as we remember the 50th anniversary of Bloody Sunday in Selma, Alabama. Also with us here in Washington, D.C. is Dorrie Ladner. As a young woman, she marched in Selma for the right to vote. We're also joined by Avis Jones-DeWeaver, who is the host of the U.S. syndicated radio show Focus Point with Avis Jones-DeWeaver. Thanks again to all of you. Stephen, we've been looking at those amazing pictures that you took there. What were your impressions of Dr. King? Because you actually managed to get pretty close to him during the march, didn't you?
Yes, I did. I must say there was a remarkable quality to Dr. King, an incredible amount of gravitas, quietude. He was essentially the quiet eye in the storm surrounding him. Wherever he moved, it was a kind of quietude about him, a sturdy sense of strength and purpose. And he was a confidence-building individual. When I was around him, I could feel his effect on other people. Essentially, he was a driving force, but one which was more Gandhi-esque. As I use that term, gravitas, you felt the power and certitude and certainty in the man. And I tried to capture that with my camera, the sense of focus and vision that I think he had for not only for his people, but for the country as a whole. And I tried to measure up to what I felt he was transmitting to the people around him, and attempted to capture that sensibility, and so that viewers that would see my image would see a measure of the man.
Avis, this is, I know, a hypothetical question, but what would Martin Luther King have thought right now if he looked over the last 50 years and sees what's happening?
I would think that he would be happy that the work that he and all of those within the civil rights movement put in has actually resulted in a lot of legal changes in terms of just the letter of the law in this nation. And that is true. And doors have opened that were previously closed, no doubt about that. But I think also he would be very disappointed that there are a lot of things that are still occurring beyond the letter of the law, which leads to discriminatory practices that constricts opportunities still to this day for African Americans, that lead to different outcomes in terms of wealth disparities, in terms of targeting by police forces for violence, a lot of different outcomes that are brutal and discriminatory. And so I think he would say that we've done a lot, but we've got a lot more to do.
You mentioned targeting by police forces. Dorrie, isn't it an irony that we're sitting here today talking about the 50th anniversary of Selma, and just a day ago, the Attorney General of the United States, a black man himself, Eric Holder, issued a report that was devastating in how black people are being treated this day, this age, right now, in the United States, in Ferguson, in Missouri?
I'm not being cynical, as I've laid out part of my history to you, and about murders of minority people, as black people. When I heard him say that, I was not shaken by that. I expected a little more by him being in that position, but the stranglehold is still on him with the discrimination from the status quo, the system in this United States of America. I wasn't shocked.
What did you think of that? I mean, the fact that this report came out at about the same time that
Right.
we're talking about this, we're commemorating the 50th anniversary.
I feel like, I wasn't shocked either, in the sense that I feel like it's an example of the lights being turned on and you get to see the roaches for a few seconds. I believe that if a similar investigation were conducted in police forces across the country, you would find very similar results. What I find very sad, though, is that what's being played up it's horrible, the emails, the racist emails that show state of mind, not only of police officers, but also of people working within the court system. But really, to me, the broader systemic actions that really, to me, are very similar to, strong arm tactics that have been used against this community, using violence against this community to extort money to balance the budget of that city. It is unconscionable. Everyone from the top down needs to be fired, and they need to start over from scratch.
Well, one of the things, when I was watching that, I mean, it wasn't, because we often hear, there's a few bad apples among a lot of us, and that doesn't contaminate the whole barrel. But here, as you point out, it was systemic, it was policy, it was a concerted effort.
Exactly, exactly. When you're talking about...
It is systemic. It is not that particular area, it is systemic.
Yeah, setting dogs on people.
Across the nation.
I mean...
Let's get back to Stephen in California. Stephen, your photographs now stand as a lasting legacy, a record of what took place in 1965. What is it that you hope the United States and the world will never forget about Bloody Sunday, about Selma, about the marches?
I think every generation has to relearn the history. It is not something that is simply bedrock at one moment in time, but has to be, in a sense, relived through perhaps my photographs to see what that generation had to do. And as you can see from the conversation you've been having today, that the next generation has to learn that over again. It is not something that is enshrined in a moment, but has to be relived again so that people can renew their dedication to the goals that were set those days when the marches went from Selma to Montgomery. The Voting Rights Act itself is just one point in time. What it was intended to do is free people to pursue their own goals in life, their own families, their own jobs. And that is something that perhaps we've seen much of the nation has not yet had the ability to take advantage of that enfranchisement. And I would hope that my photographs would instill in people a renewed sense of purpose today, and to perhaps fulfill some of the goals that Dr. King had laid out at that time.
Avis, we've seen a key part of the Voting Rights Act being struck down by the U.S. Supreme Court. We've seen states themselves take action to block people from voting. This is happening over the last few years. Have you seen anything happening on Capitol Hill in the U.S. Congress to try and block that, to try and change that?
You know, the Supreme Court essentially punted the ball to Congress and said, well, you need to fix this. And ever since then, the ball has been in their court. There was a little bit of a movement during the last session to have some legislation. It never really gained traction. Same thing this time, it's like nothing's there. And what I'm concerned about is that in a couple of days, you're going to have 90 legislators go down to Selma for a photo op, and then they're going to come back to DC and do absolutely nothing about correcting this wrong. You know, this is more than the opportunity to basically sort of use this particular moment in history to bolster their standing. They need to really do what's right and make sure that the spirit and the letter of the law is on the side of the people in America so that we truly do have broad access to voting rights in America. Well,
the commemoration is going to provide a great photo op for all these politicians. Are they just going to forget about it when they come back?
Not unless the American public pressures them not to. Left to their own devices, I fully expect them to forget about it.
Doreen, when you were taking part in these marches, in the struggle, way back in the 60s, and this was a struggle for basic rights at the time, this was a struggle to vote. Correct. Did you at every point ever think that one day there will be a black president in the United States in my lifetime?
No, I hadn't gotten that far because we were trying to get local rights to vote. And from there, after we went to the Democratic Convention in 1968, some concessions were made. And I can sit here and say today that Mississippi has the highest number of black elected officials in the country. But that doesn't mean that we're economically sound. It still remains the poorest state in the nation. And the biggest problem that we are facing now is an economic drought. And I don't know how that will be turned around. Photo ops are good, but the economics are horrible.
And Avis, if we look at the demographics in the country right now, African Americans are vastly underrepresented.
Yeah, exactly. And if you look, for example, specifically at black women, there's not been a black woman in the U.S. Senate for 16 years now. There's only been one in the entire history of the United States. And so when you think about my specific demographic, my representation in the U.S. Senate, basically totally unrepresented. So yes, though we do have a measure of power on the local level, at state levels, and in Congress, we're still greatly underrepresented when you compare us to our proportion in the population.
And the gerrymandering will continue to keep us out of it.
Exactly.
That's the rules that is used to keep us underrepresented.
The redistricting. That's
Exactly.
Right.
Yeah.
And now, of course, there's going to be no protection from the federal government because of those parts of the Voting Rights Act that were taken out.
Correct.
Stephen, what do you think would be the lasting legacy of the civil rights movement in the 50s and 60s?
I think we have a benchmark back at that time, and we have to be able to exceed that. It's clear that the goals that were set at that time have to be expanded. Just simply achieving the voting rights was a marvelous experience, but clearly the effect on people's lives have been diminished over time, and we have to expand it. And the only way to expand it is for them to relearn what their parents had gone through, and what they have to go through themselves. It's clear that there are people in the government who are trying to roll back the achievements of that time, and it has to be opposed. We have to make new inroads in voting rights and in worker opportunities, in education. There's a whole plethora of events that have to take place yet in order for these people to come into the full exercise of their franchise. And we have not achieved it yet. And perhaps my photographs and the memories that they bring forward might act as an impetus to drive this goal forward.
Dory, we have a few seconds left. I have to ask you this. The movie, Selma, was it an accurate representation of what happened?
No, no.
You did not approve?
No.
What did you think, Avis?
Well, obviously I wasn't there.
Right.
But I would have to say that at least I'm happy that it presented this portion of the history to a generation who may not have ever even had an inkling of what it must have been like to live in those days.
I agree with that. It brought Selma into the narrative, and young people can begin to know what Selma was and can Google and study a little about it. But that's about it.
We're going to have to leave it there. Dory Ladner, Dr. Avis Jones-DeWeaver, and Stephen Sommerstein in California. Thanks to all of you for joining us. That's it for this edition of The Heat. We leave you now with more photographs from Stephen Sommerstein of the 1965 Civil Rights March from Selma to Montgomery. And we also posted a slideshow of his collection on cctv-america.com. I'm Arnold Naidoo in Washington, D.C. Thanks for being with us.